Morning guys, how are you doing today? I'm going to talk to you about night fighting. This isn't going to be the ultimate gear post because there's a lot of gear out there. I'm not reviewing gear, but I'm going to talk about general sort of capabilities and what you're looking to achieve to make your night fighting situation more effective. So we normally train tactical operations during the day. We go on the range during the day. It's one thing. When you get to nighttime, it's going to be different, and this is something that needs to be trained for. Now, it's entirely possible to conduct operations at night in the old school way, which we used to do, and I've got plenty of time doing it. And what we're talking about here is moving and conducting operations at night with natural night vision perhaps a limited technical capability, and just doing it the old school way. The issue is that you're not leveraging any of the advantages that we now have available to us in terms of technology. The other issue is that because that technology is available, if you're doing things at night and you're in any kind of peer-to-peer situation where the enemy does have night vision capability of some form, then you are at a big disadvantage. This is something that you seriously need to consider. So there's various night vision capability, night vision equipment capabilities available to us now, and to many extents what we're doing is we're sort of mimicking what the military is currently doing, and a lot of that technology is coming out of the military and is available on the civilian market. And in that case, so what I'm going to tell you, it's military stuff, and it's relevant. So there's a few things that are going to be available to us, and so in outline, what we've got is NVGs or NODs, night vision goggles, and that is an IR that will normally be a passive IR device. So what that means is it's an image intensifier. So what these devices do, you'll have heard PVS-14, this kind of thing, the old PVS-7. What these things will do is they will amplify using a tube. They're going to amplify the available light. What that means is that they work to different effect depending on the ambient light that night. So depending on the moon state, the cloud state, that kind of thing, depends on how effective they are. So effectively on a dark, cloudy, moonless night, they're not going to work as well as on a sort of a full moon, cloudless night with snow on the ground, where there's a lot of ambient light to be amplified. What that also means is if you're in an environment where there is no ambient light, so you went inside a structure, then there is nothing to amplify, and in that case what you will want to do is you're going to want to use active measures, which would be something like an IR flashlight. I mean, a lot of night vision goggles have a little IR light on them, but obviously if you have a weapon mounted IR flashlight, you can use that to provide that light. So when I say an IR flashlight, that's something that's not seen by the visible eye. It's not the all-seeing eye of Mordor when you've got this stuff on. And, if you can hide from someone during the day, then you can definitely hide from someone at nighttime. So IR is going to basically give you an edge. It's going to let you see more, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The other thing that's really worth mentioning about night vision equipment is that obviously it's expensive, and I'll talk at some point here about sort of the various things that are coming down the pike that are going to be available or are available right now, and a lot of that is to do with spending money. So what can you afford to spend? But the flip side of that is you can't buy yourself the night vision capability. In the same way that pilots have to get hours under NODs in order to become proficient, at say being a helicopter pilot flying at night, if you're conducting dismounted operations, you need to spend time under NODs and train live fire and train moving through the woods, etc. with this equipment on. You can't simply buy it, and you can't just put it on the shelf and expect to own the night, which is always a bit of a joke. And I've had numerous situations where actually the possession of night vision equipment has probably been a detriment to a student, where they haven't got used to it, they haven't really done anything with it. And what can actually happen is that if you're not trained in it, and you've got a situation where you've put a helmet on, it's nighttime, you've got this night vision equipment on, you've probably got one tube on a PVS 14, which is going to give you a 30-degree cone of night vision aided sight. Obviously you can see through your other eye, but it might even be slightly drizzling on a dark night, and in that kind of situation it can actually cause claustrophobia. And I've seen people who are unaided by night vision actually perform better, depending on the light conditions, than someone who is completely untried at night vision and just throws the stuff on and expects that they're going to own the night. So it's definitely something to consider. You need to train with this equipment. So the way you should consider the use of night vision goggles is to mount them on your head. I've seen a lot of talk about mounting these kind of night optics on a rifle combined with a night vision capable sight, but what that means is you can only observe when you're on patrol when you bring the weapon up to your eye, and it doesn't actually give you any night vision for when you're patrolling around. So the way to do this is to actually mount it on your head. The exception to that would be if you had some kind of specialty sight that was specifically wanted to be mounted on the rifle, something like a thermal night sight or something that was going to be mounted on a specific sniper rifle or something like that. But generally, for conducting operations, we're going to have the thing mounted on our head so that we can make use of it all the time without having the weapon up to our face, and that's the way we want to do it. What you also don't want to be thinking of is I've seen this talked about many times, is where people think that they're going to have a night vision capable, for example, red dot on their weapon, and then they're going to bring that up and try and marry it up with this tube that's sticking out of your head. And it's just, banging and clunking. It's not practical. So that's, if you want to go that way, then you need to mount it on the rifle. If you're going to be conducting these kind of night fighting operations properly, then you should have it mounted on your head. So now, for example, there's various ways you can mount it on your head. You can put it on the old Skull Crusher, which is a nightmare. You can buy various kinds of soft caps, like the Crye nightcap, and then you can put it on the best kind of mount is to have a hard mount. In terms of the best kind of mount in terms of practicality once you're wearing it, but of course once you take that off, you've got to store it somewhere, carry it somewhere. So that's why you've got to decide whether you're going to have a sort of soft mount or whether you're going to have a hard mount, hard helmet. If you're going to have a hard helmet, it's going to be better to mount the equipment to, but you want to consider whether you're going to have a bump helmet, which doesn't provide you with any ballistic protection, or whether you're going to actually have a ballistic helmet. And these are all decisions you need to make. So for example here, here's a ballistic helmet, and so what you're going to need to get is you're going to get an arm which is going to attach to the mount on the front here, and then into the arm there. This is for example, this is a PVS 14. The PVS 14 is going to attach to that, and it sits up, okay, and then you flip it down when you're ready to use this, and you have to adjust the kind of the relief from your eye, etc. So that's a quick example of having a helmet which is going to mount this to. This provides you with a problem. The problem is that now you've got no interface between your weapon sights and your head-mounted nods. That's where the IR laser comes in. There's a lot of products on the market for that, DBALs, OTALs. You can get visible lasers with non-visible lasers. You can get IR lasers only, etc. Effectively, what you want to get is one that has a momentary switch so that you can actually, you don't want that laser to be on the whole time. You want to be able to bring it on when you want to actually engage and then turn it off. What I do recommend here, and I'll just give a shout out now to Robert at JRH Enterprises. Robert, he comes and trains at MVT quite frequently. He's a really good guy in terms of night vision equipment. If you want to give JRH Enterprises, look them up, give them a call, and they can talk to you about the specifics of this kind of equipment. So a shout out to Robert right there. He supplied me with some stuff which I've purchased off him, and it's always very good. And usually if you're an MVT alumni, he's usually going to give you some kind of discount. So ask him when you call him. So we've got the head-mounted nods, and we've got the weapon-mounted IR laser, which is the interface, and that's our aiming laser. What you've got to consider here is are you in a non-peer-to-peer environment or in a peer-to-peer environment? So what does your potential threat, your potential enemy have? And that's going, so I mean, generally you can't, for example, go around with, you know, and you wouldn't want to anyway because it's standard light discipline, but you don't want to go around with your laser switched on all the time, and you don't want to go around with sort of IR flashlights on all the time. So you're going to have to figure out, because that's normal light discipline in the same way you would apply it to white light. One thing I'd also highly recommend is the use of a thermal imager, a small handheld thermal imager. For example, I've got a FLIR Scout. I know they brought out some other devices smaller since, and so that's a different part of that's the thermal part of the IR spectrum. So when you're using nods, that's just going to image intensify. It's going to show you more in the darkness. But thermal is an excellent way of observation. And thermal, you're going to see a lot more, a lot easier. You can't look through glass with a thermal device. And thermal is not, again, the all-seeing eye of Mordor. You can use terrain and vegetation masking to defeat thermal, but you will see a lot better with thermal. The way I recommend that you would use this is that you would patrol around with your nods mounted to your head so that you can patrol and observe, and then use something like a FLIR Scout or a small thermal imager to stop and scan the ground ahead, the terrain you're about to move across, and check it out sort of for thermal signature before then sort of putting that away and then moving across that next piece of ground. There's a lot to this topic, and I hope I don't... how long are we talking for now? So I've already been talking for 12 minutes, so there's a lot to this topic. So maybe I'll have to do a part 2 to this. So that's definitely an ideal. Now, what's coming down the road and is available now are devices that will merge thermal and merge IR, and you can have sort of one or the other, and you can overlay it, but that's just a case of how much money you're going to spend. So you can get a PVS 14 for somewhere like maybe $2.5 grand. You can maybe get a thermal imager for about $2 grand. Significant chunk of change, but if you're concerned about the ability to operate at night, it's definitely worth it. Some other stuff is going to cost you a lot of money. When you get to double tubes, PVS 15, all sorts of the other crazy stuff that's coming down the road, it's going to cost you a lot of money. What you got to remember on the thermal is that thermal doesn't pick up the IR, and this is a danger, and it has happened. It's a danger for, what do I mean by that? So if you're just looking through a thermal device, it's not going to see aiming lasers, and it's not going to see some of the devices that are used, such as Firefly, even glint tape, various strobe kind of devices that are used in a peer to non-peer environment where you're not worried about the enemy having the ability to observe these, and you're using IR light sticks, etc., where you're using it to facilitate friendly operations, and where you are using them to prevent friendly fire, fratricide. So if you're looking through thermal alone, it's not going to pick that up. It's a consideration if you've just got a thermal night sight on a rifle, for example. You're going to see the people, but you're not necessarily going to see the device that they've got sort of for friendly, to protect against friendly fire. For example, on the helmet here, I've got a strobe. In my training environment, this is primarily used as a night fire safety device. So, safety have got a strobe on top of the helmet so people can observe where we are. It's primarily a safety device. So the thing about something like this is that if the enemy had night vision capability, I couldn't have this flashing on because the enemy's going to see it. So it's a breach of light discipline. So if you're in a defensive environment, one thing you can consider is if you don't have night vision for everybody, for example, if you had a thermal handheld, then you could have that with the person on watch. And then to sort of conserve batteries, they could turn it on every 15 minutes or whatever and do a perimeter scan and it's going to pick up threats very effectively. And then, if they had, you can't engage with that unless you'd spent the money to have a thermal IR sort of combination. But then you could pick up the threat using your nods and then pick up the threat with your IR laser. Another thing to consider is that if you had sort of a defensive position but you didn't have enough equipment so that everybody was equipped with night vision equipment, what you can do is go old school, which is it was very effective, and that's the use of white light. And that might be white light weapon mounted, which is not ideal in an outside environment, but what would be ideal would be the use of parachute illumination flares. Classically, these would be fired by mortars, or British Army used to have these we call them shimoolis. It was like a marine flare that you'd fire, and it would whoosh up and pop. You probably see them in the movies. I think in Platoon, they've got them sort of drifting over the jungle. And these are very effective. You can use flare guns, as long as they've got parachute illumination flares, and the flares are going to burn for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, depending on what you've got. So if you identified a threat by use of technology, by use of thermal, and you stood everybody to, gave them sort of fire control orders, and then banged a parachute illumination up, that allows everybody with normal sights to actually engage for the duration of that flare being up. So you can marry old school and new technology to provide a more effective defense. Also, never disregard the use of white light. So weapon mounted flashlights, white light can be used very effectively in a CQB environment inside structures with judicious use of on and off. So night vision stuff is really cool. It's cool guy stuff. But what you got to remember is, depending on what you've got and the field of view it's going to give you, you've got this stuff fixed to your face. And if you're going into rooms in a very close environment where, then you can have issues, especially if someone gets on you close. You have problems with depth perception, that kind of thing. So something to consider is the use of judicious use of nods. So perhaps if you're doing, a stealthy move, then you can use the nods. And then when you go noisy, then go to white light. Traditionally, the way sort of the wisdom of it was that if you had a single tube night vision device, such as a PVS-14, then the tradition was the wisdom was to wear that on your non-dominant eye. So if I'm right eye dominant, I'm going to wear that over my left eye. And the idea of that is if the light conditions changed, so you went inside a structure and it was lit, or you actually lit it yourself with white light, you could still bring your day optic up and use it without even having to flip up that night vision device. Obviously take that for what it is. Wear the night vision on the side that it works for you, is comfortable for you. But there's all these various just little bits of tidbits and advice. What you've also got to remember is that so at night time when an engagement happens, so yeah, you might be putting out momentary laser, and the enemy, if they are equipped with it, might also be putting out momentary laser, which also can be observed. Now the laser is usually, depending on the sort of dust and moisture conditions in the air, it may only be observed at the point of origin and the point where it's actually shining on. But obviously if you've got dust particles in the air, smoke, moisture, then you might actually see part or partial or even the whole laser, kind of like Star Wars seeing the whole laser. And obviously all that is going to give your position away to any enemy that are using, also using nods. It's also going to give their position away. One sort of problem, sort of anecdotal comment is I find that people are always looking for the perfect solution, and you've got to remember that everything you do in combat is a calculated risk. You can't sort of level, or not even level the playing field. You can't just make it so that you're not taking any risk, which is why we train. It's why we're going to use momentary laser, etc. Momentary laser engage, move position, etc. Think that, and don't forget that, also you're going to have muzzle flash, both from you and the enemy, whether or not you're using night vision equipment or not. And muzzle flash is going to give positions away. And even if the enemy doesn't have night vision and you do, they will fire at your muzzle flash. And in fact, one of the things that you have to do through training, once you're, if you're conducting night assaults, etc., you have to train your guys to shoot at muzzle flash, but not to converge onto the muzzle flash of enemy positions, which involves bunching and all that kind of stuff. So these are all sort of interesting things, but you are going to have muzzle flash. Those of you guys that want to have muzzle brakes, which I call loudness, or body effers for another way of putting it. Those of you guys that want to have all that on your rifles, then it's not cool. You're going to have fireballs coming out of the end of your rifles. If you just put a standard bird cage, like A2 bird cage on your rifle, on your M4, right? AR-15, okay? It's all you need, unless you go to suppressor. Now suppressor, that's a different conversation. Suppressor is going to obviously reduce muzzle flash more, but suppressor is a whole other different conversation depending on the volume of fire you expect to be putting out. I've seen suppressor covers light on fire and melt, even though they're made of stuff that's not supposed to burn. So that's a whole other conversation. My point being, be careful of muzzle flash and consider the muzzle device that you've got on the end of your rifle something that will actually dampen muzzle flash. You're going to have it anyway, so consider that. So we do run night fighting or night firing classes. They're short sort of introductory classes. We don't run them between April and September. So any Heat 1 class outside those dates, from September to April, is going to have the option of running a night firing class. It's a sort of 2 or 3 hour class, and we'll sort of introduce you to things on the flat range, get you doing stuff, and then very safely under control, we'll have you do a sort of a mimicked simulated raid. So it's effectively doing a lot of the things that you're doing during the day, but under tight control at night. And it's essential to get into using this equipment. You also need to put it on and walk around and go just out around your property and see, practice walking at night. I will say that at the beginning I stated that, it's perfectly reasonable and possible to conduct operations at night without the use of modern night vision technology. But given the prevalence of this technology, you will be at a distinct disadvantage against anybody that does have it. Obviously, if they have it and don't know how to use it, that's a separate issue, but who knows, okay? So it is well worth investing in something like a PVS-14 with the system to mount it on your head, an IR aiming laser, and then I think that what also is well worth it is some kind of thermal handheld. Yes, you can get it all combined, etc., etc., etc. So I'm sort of looking at the lower budget end of getting into this. That's where I'm at. I don't have sort of combined IR, thermal, all that kind of stuff. So I got a PVS-14, I got a FLIR Scout, which is slightly older generation, a few years ago now, and I got an OTAL, which is a IR aiming laser. It doesn't have the visible laser on it at all, so it's smaller. Just has the IR portion. Get that equipment, train with it, and then you'll be a lot better off at night. Even if you're just talking from a defensive perspective, the ability to scan with thermal, scan with nods, pick up any threats, and accurately engage any threats out to reasonable distances. You're probably not looking beyond like 100 meters at night anyway, depending on the environment. So it's well worth it. I think that's probably enough. Probably talked too long. It's a big topic. I may, if I get questions on this, I may do another one of these talks to sort of follow up and elaborate. Thanks very much.